welcome to this month's episode of Chancellor Chats. I'm here today with Ciaran Conway from Devenish. Ciaran, tell me a little bit about yourself and Devenish.
Lisa, how are you? And delighted to be here. Basically, my name is Ciaran Conway from Devenish. I work as a beef nutritionist with Devenish. I'm also a beef farmer. I fatten a number of cattle every year, so I'm very in tune with farmers' needs and requirements. Devenish is basically based up in the north of Ireland, even though we've primarily manufactured premixes for all breeds, all types of livestock. So for cattle, pigs, poultry and companion animals. We have plants all over the world. We have 2 plants in the UK, a plant in Turkey, a plant in North America, 3 plants actually in North America, and a plant in Mexico. My area, as I said, is beef nutrition, but also focus on soil health and on transition cow nutrition.
Very good. Now, Devenish is a very, very strong mineral company here in Ireland. You know, a huge amount of farmers are very, very familiar with Devenish. We're here today to talk a little bit about minerals, especially the pre-calving minerals that are coming up now.
That's right. Very appropriate that we're talking about this at this time of the year. Farmers are about to dry off their cows. So it's really important that we focus on this whole area of the transition cow. The transition cow is basically the cow 3 weeks before calving and 3 weeks after calving. And if we get that period right, we are guaranteed a very successful lactation next year in terms of milk initiation, reduced somatic cell count, cow fertility, and all that leads to basically profitable milk production.
So Dalton's here in Kilkenny are stockers of Devenish minerals, and as it stands at the moment, we're in late lactation. I suppose a lot of us are considering drying off cows. You look at the dry cow period in a dairy cow. Some people will call it maybe the start of the cycle of a new year. Other people call it the start of calf and maybe the new cycle. But as it stands right now, you have maybe 6 weeks, 2 months of management there on the dry cow and getting it ready for calving. Dry cow minerals are probably very important to be looking at right now and what you're going to put into your cow.
Absolutely, Lisa. And first of all, I'd say let's look at the importance of what we call the transition cow in the life cycle of the cow, which is basically 3 weeks before calving and 3 weeks after calving.
Very good.
And preparing that cow for the transition period is extremely important, because if you look at the issues that arise during the cow's lactation, a lot of them are actually related to the transition period. If the transition period is not managed correctly, you will have issues regarding, things like milk fever, dystocia, retained cleansings, and numerous other metabolic disorders, and you will have knock-on effects in terms of milk initiation and fertility. So it's extremely important that we get that transition period right. And the first step in managing that transition period is preparing the cow for it. So if you take it, the cow is about to be dried off after a long, a spell of milking in which she's given out a huge amount of nutrients via her milk. So the first step is to replenish those nutrients that she's lost in that milking period. And then what we do then is look at basically the forages that are available to the cow and determine, are they suitable to making sure that transition period is successful.
And you're talking about testing silage here. And I suppose, look, from a local point of view, a Kilkenny point of view, a majority of dairy farmers in Kilkenny are spring calf and herd, right? So they'll be drying off somewhere around 1st of December, maybe mid-December, calving down maybe somewhere around start of February. Silage pits, at that time of the year, cows can be still out by day. Silage pits mightn't be open, they might be used as silage bales. But you're looking at the silage that's going to be used for the dry cow period here now.
Exactly.
Not all types of silage, just actually specifically the silage that you will use in these 6 or 8 weeks.
Well, the first thing I would say is, if you have 1, 2 or 3 pits of silage, let's get samples from each of the pits, because the first thing is to determine which is the most suitable silage for those dry cows. They have a very specific requirement in terms of the mineral profile of those silages.
Yes.
So it's the first thing we do is get a sample away. It'll take 2 to 3 weeks for that sample to come back, and that will determine, number one, what silage we're going to feed those cows, whether it's from pit 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever silage pits you have. And then it'll also determine what our approach will be from a mineral point of view, from a mineral supplementation point of view.
Very good.
Uh,
And when we're testing silage now, and this is something that's spoke to me for a long time, the silage core, okay?
Yeah.
Very rarely does that actually go down deep. A lot of people would say you'd be better off to test the silage 2 or 3 weeks into opening the pit, or the pit of choice, or maybe you only have access to one pit, you have to use one side. But when you get 2 weeks into that, you have a face in front of you, and you can actually test the silage that's just there in front of you.
Good point. I suppose the main thing is to realise that your pre-calving program has to start about 8 weeks out from calving.
Yes.
So if you say we're going to be calving on the 1st of February, we have to start that program on the 1st of December, or maybe the first week of December.
However, you might be only opening your pit that day.
Yeah, but okay, so we can start off on a base mineral called the TMR Elite Dry Cow.
That's correct, yeah.
And we can put them on that mineral until we get our silage results back, and that determines then what our mineral program is going to be from then on. Because as the cow approaches calving, the mineral program becomes more and more critical, and it's more and more critical to get that mineral program right if you want to avoid all the metabolic disorders that I referred to in my introduction.
And when we're looking at these metabolic disorders, the main one that comes to mind to me would be milk fever.
Exactly.
Massive problem. Got to do with a huge potash levels in silage. It's ongoing. People don't realise they have it. There's milk fever, there's subclinical milk fever. It's not a place any farmer wants to go in the spring, in a busy calving period, and having cows dropping with milk fever. But at that point, this is what, when you're testing the silage, you're actually testing for this silage to know, is it potentially going to give the cow milk fever, or are they more prone to milk fever on this silage?
Yeah. So first of all, it's important to realise that milk fever is what is called an iceberg disease. So if you get one case of clinical milk fever, it really means that you have about 9 other cases of subclinical milk fever. So it's very important to realise that any milk fever should not be tolerated. We should do all in our power to try and eliminate it. We all know the classic milk fever, but the subclinical milk fever is equally as important in terms of cleanings, the cow cleaning properly in time, no metritis after, good milk initiation, and closing of the cervix when the whole calving process is finished, again to avoid infection. And then all of that will lead into good milk initiation, reaching peak milk in a timely fashion, and also reducing somatic cell counts, and eventually leading to the cow rebreeding in a timely manner.
Yes.
So it's extremely important that, exactly what you said, we look at the potassium levels in the silage, and that will determine what our next step is and what our approach will be from a mineral point of view. We have about 5 different minerals which we will then recommend, or which we will ask the farmer to feed his cows. And the mineral we pick will be dependent on the level of potassium in that silage. And that's really as simple as that.
And I suppose that's one of the really, really good things about a relationship with the likes of a merchant and the likes of Devenish, that, you know, we have the support backup from any of the staff in Devenish to help us with if a farmer of ours does run into these problems.
Absolutely.
But the very important thing that I think you said there is that if you see one case of milk fever, that there is potentially up to 10 more subclinical, and not to tolerate one.
Exactly.
Even.
Yeah. So if you've one, you have a problem.
Yeah.
So one cow with milk fever in 100 cows might be only 1%, but that means you have 10% of your herd are probably exposed to subclinical milk fever.
Yes. Also, kind of a relationship there actually between mastitis and milk fever, and it's got to do with the canal ends, the teat canal ends.
Absolutely. Again, you know, you put the cow under pressure, and ultimately all this relates back to what they call calcium flow. And if you think of the calving process, before calving, the cow has quite limited requirements for calcium, and she tends to store that calcium in her bones. Once the calving process starts, which tends to be about 24 hours before the calf is delivered, or even longer, there is a huge demand on calcium, because calcium drives involuntary muscle contraction, And if you think of the calving process, that's exactly what it is. The womb is the biggest involuntary muscle in the cow. And for that, to get the strong contractions in that muscle, we need good calcium flow. So what interferes with that calcium flow is basically potassium. So we have to counteract the effects of potassium. We do it through our mineral program, and that's really what the aim of the program is to make sure we have good calcium flow in that calving period.
Yeah, and if you do find yourself running into problems, or if you have tested your silage and we can maybe envisage problems down the road, like you have a number of products, let's just talk about maybe there's a 50-50 mix there.
Exactly, yeah. So I talked about, we have the TMR Super Dry cow, which is basically the base dry cow. We have the TMR Elite Dry cow. We have then the 50-50, and then we have the 360. And then we have a new product. We have to get in the sole agency for it in the UK and Ireland, UK, Ireland and Denmark, which is a product from America called Soil. And this was developed by Professor Jesse Goff, who from Landis Co-op. And Professor Jesse Goff is probably the foremost leading expert on transition cow nutrition in the world. And again, for the really difficult cases, we have Jesse at the end of a phone for us. And we hope to be bringing Jesse over to Ireland within the next 12 months to visit some of our dairy farmers here. So we have huge resources behind not only the products, but behind the whole transition cow program.
Yeah, and I've actually spoke to one of your nutritionists, Jack, and Jack came down and had a great chat with myself, Stephen and Patsy here last week, and just the wealth of information he had, and you just knew there was going to be solutions to every problem.
Absolutely.
And if not, Devenish would help a merchant like Dalton's to find the solutions, that kind of way. But for the last maybe 3 to 5 years, you would have seen an increased number of milk fevers.
Yes.
On most farms. What we're probably losing to milk fever is unknown in ways, but I suppose education through looking at your silage, looking at your feeding, looking at a lot of things, and with the help of Devenish, we can probably solve it and get better lactating cows post-calving.
Exactly. It's all about getting that cow. Literally, it's like landing an airplane. She hits the runway at the right altitude, the right speed. She will power on in terms of milk initiation, reducing somatic cell count, and return to breeding. It's as simple as that.
So she's going to come in, hit the ground running, hit peak, go back and calf.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Well, that's what we're aiming for. We know in certain situations, but you're obviously aiming for the best at all times, that kind of way.
And our relationship with the merchants like yourself and Dalton's here is very, very important, because there's only about 6 people on the road from Devenish, 6 nutritionists on the road from Devenish. So we're not able to cover the country, but through the merchants, we can make sure that the dairy farmers get the top quality product in a timely manner to their cows.
Very good. Yeah, and definitely after speaking with Jack and yourselves, like we found there was a great support, massive support service from Devenish, and we're very, very happy to know that, come next January, that support is right behind us.
Exactly.
That kind of way.
Support and product.
Yes, absolutely. So it's wonderful. Devenish have wonderful products, wonderful support, and hopefully we'll be great together from now on in.
Yeah, perfect.
That's it. Now, just talking a little bit more about Devenish and other things that you do. Devenish do soil regenerative program.
Exactly, yeah. So I suppose we've been researching this area for the last maybe 12, 15 years at this stage. And we realise a lot of issues around cow and ruminant nutrition, and especially issues relating to herd health, relating to molybdenum toxicity, relating to excess potassium, excess iron. All of these issues, all of these minerals impact on the herd health of the cow. So if you take something like molybdenum, it's well known that molybdenum locks up copper. Copper is very important in terms of rebreeding of fertility in the cow.
Thrive in an animal.
Thrive in the young animals. We look at iron. Iron is extremely important in terms of the overall immune system of the herd. So if you have elevated iron levels in your forages, you will tend to see that your herd overall immune system is depleted in the herd. We look at potassium levels, which we've discussed there. And ultimately, we've done a lot of research on this, and we've done it with a a very eminent nutritionist and soil scientist in the UK called Dr. David Atherton. And we came up with this, what we call the Soil Improvement Program, because very quickly we realised that a lot of the mineral issues on the farms were related to the fact that related to the issues that were in the soils. And the single biggest issue we've seen in Irish soils and UK soils, by the way, is compaction. And basically compaction is where you squeeze the air out of the soil and you're left with a soil which is basically just one big glob with no air through it. Just when you dig it up, it comes up like a brick. It doesn't fall apart in your hands like a good soil.
No drainage.
No drainage, absolutely. So a lot of it, because of that then, if you imagine all life forms depend on air. If you have no air in your soil, you lose the biology or the life forms in your soil. So we brought together this, what we call the Devenish Soil Improvement Program, which addresses the three critical areas of the soil. The physical aspects of the soil, the chemical aspects of the soil, and the biological aspects of the soil. The physical aspects of the soil is literally how tight is that soil, how little air is in that soil. And we've devised a program whereby you either aerate your soil or you subsoil your soil, depending on where the level of compaction is in your soil. That's the physical part of the program. The chemical part of the program is very aligned to what Chancellor'S do, in the sense that it's critical that your soil pH is correct. So for grass growth, you need a soil pH of about 6.3 to 6.5.
Yes.
If your soil pH isn't right, you are not optimizing your utilization of things like phosphorus. Phosphorus is extremely important for all life forms in terms of anything that requires energy. Phosphorus is the main mineral driving that energy synthesis and energy mobilization. And again, so we look at the soil pH, the soil phosphorus levels. And an interesting thing about Irish soils in particular, Irish soils are stuffed with phosphorus, but a lot of those soils, the phosphorus is unavailable.
Actually, funny you should mention that, and I was just thinking while you were saying it, I know there's a graph, and I've seen it several times, that it just shows the phosphorus availability going up and back down. But it's in that small little window of this like 6.3 to 6.5 that you get optimum availability.
Absolutely.
And it's within a hair's breadth, 6.3 to 6.5.
Yeah.
But that's optimum availability.
Exactly.
At either side, you have lockup.
Yeah. So you send away your soil sample and it's tested for phosphorus. What they're testing for is available phosphorus. And invariably a lot of farmers come back and say, oh, my available phosphorus is low, what can I do? What we do is we send a soil sample away, we get the available phosphorus and the total phosphorus. And then if the ratio of available phosphorus to total phosphorus is extremely low, we then look at how we can, or why is it low? And there's three reasons that phosphorus availability will be low. It'll be due to soil pH, which we talked about. It'll be due to soil temperature, which is basically a function of the time of the year. But also soil temperature is a function of the compaction, level of compaction in the soil. So a heavily compacted soil takes a lot longer to warm up in the springtime of the year rather than a good open loose soil. And the third area is the biological activity within the soil, which is again is related.
Microbes, earthworms.
There's do you realise that there's actually more species beneath the soil on this earth than there is above the soil? And the indicator species, we call it, is the earthworm. So if you have loads of earthworm in your soils are working well.
Yes.
That is the key. So it's literally as simple as going out with a spade and digging a hole, the depth of the spade by the width of the spade.
Visually looking at the profile.
Visually looking at the soil. The smell of that soil is important. You get a nice earthy smell to it. The colour of that soil is important. How it breaks up in your hand. Is it a big blob of soil, or does it break up into what we call a lovely friable soil? That's the ideal one.
And how do you cope with factors of, I suppose, different areas? Because there's always going to be drier land versus wetter land.
Absolutely.
Heavier land.
Yes.
Naturally acidic land, which has different buffering capacities. Sometimes you lime them, and the pH will last a little longer. How do you classify it when you have this?
A very, very good question. And there's a lot in that which I'm not going to go into today, but ultimately, and this is why we linked up with a soil scientist of the calibre of David Atherton, What he relies on is, I'm not sure, you're definitely not old enough to remember this, I am, is basically the old...
You're my favourite already. Definitely my favourite.
The Albrecht, Professor Albrecht was an eminent soil scientist in the US back in the 1930s. And he came up with the Albrecht theory on soil science. And what he looked at was the calcium-magnesium ratio in the soil. So if you imagine every soil particle has an electrical charge, and the strength or weakness of that electrical charge determines how near or how far that soil particle can come to the next soil particle. And ultimately that electrical charge is determined by the calcium-magnesium ratio of your soil. And that in a macro scale, that's at a micro level. In a macro level, that ultimately decides your soil structure. Your soil structure decides your water infiltration. And this is the real critical part. And this is where what we're talking about now opens the debate out to how our soils are the secret to farmers to improving the environmental status of our country. Because if you think of it, a properly functioning soil which is open and porous, and you have a heavy rainfall event like we're having here at the moment, the rain falls on that soil, and the soil is open and porous. The rain washes the nutrients that lie on top of that soil in the form of cattle slurry, whatever, down into the root layers of that soil. The roots then of the crop that's growing, be it grass or be it a maize crop or a wheat crop, ultimately take the nutrients out from that water. In other words, purifying that water. That water goes down into the aquifers down below, purified. Now you think of the opposite of that, where soil is compacted. And again, you have that heavy rainfall event.
And this is what's leading to our...
Absolutely, to our pollution issues.
Yeah.
So you have the heavy rainfall event, the same rain falls on top of the soil is impervious, doesn't let water into it because it's compacted. The water washes the nutrients down across the surface of the soil into the nearest water course. What have we got?
Absolutely. I'm going to just challenge you there a small bit now. Like, I live in Kilkenny.
Yeah.
I live slightly south of the city, right?
Yeah.
But I know like the likes of Bennettsbridge, Kells, Stonyford, lovely area of soil, right? Absolutely beautiful, picture perfect. Okay, you go down near South Kilkenny as well. One or two research farms down there that we've looked at this beautiful, perfect soil.
Yeah.
You go a bit east of Kilkenny, a little bit north of Kilkenny, you're actually running into naturally heavier ground.
That's right.
It's harder to farm, we know that. But it's very hard to get what you're saying right in those areas.
Yeah.
And that's a natural challenge.
Absolutely. And again, what we would do in that case, or in both cases actually, we start off by taking a soil sample, and we send it off to the laboratory, and we concentrate on the chemical aspect of the soil improvement program.
Yeah.
Which is where we look at the pH, we look at the P levels, we also look at the calcium magnesium ratio. If you have very sticky soils, you would tend to find that the magnesium levels, the calcium magnesium ratio is very, very low. In other words, there's more magnesium than there is calcium, or the ratio is wrong. And that's what you tend to find. I know the area you're talking about, maybe Castlecomer, up that neck of the woods.
Well, funny enough, Kilkenny is a huge farming community,
Absolutely,
huge farming county.
Yeah.
But I would say there's a good strong 50% of it that is actually quite more challenging to farm than the rest of it.
Exactly. But once we know what that calcium magnesium ratio is, and if we see it that it's out of balance, we then correct it. And it's quite simple to correct it in the sense of, number one, you ask, what's the pH like?
Yes.
If the pH needs to be corrected and your calcium magnesium ratio is very high, that means you need more magnesium in your soil. So you would put a magnesium lime, which you have out in Bennettsbridge.
Yes.
If the calcium magnesium ratio is low and your pH is low, you then go in with a calcium lime, which basically lifts your calcium and corrects that calcium magnesium ratio. If your pH is correct but your magnesium is low, then we go in with a product called Chancellor'S, which is basically magnesium sulfate. That will lift the magnesium levels of our soils, but not the pH of our soils. If the pH is correct and the calcium level is low, we go in with a product called gypsum, which is a well-known
it's actually a built-in product, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And it was used, again, before your time, Lisa. It was a well-known soil conditioner, and what gypsum is calcium sulfate, which again will lift the calcium level of our soils without interfering with the pH of our soil.
Is gypsum easily got?
Yeah, it's it can be got, absolutely, yeah.
Easily?
We can put you in contact with people who will get the gypsum for you.
Because I have noticed in the past, actually, and I've heard these things, but I would struggle, right? Okay, so there you go. We're in a part that's hard to farm, okay?
Yeah.
You've done what you had to. We've done the results. We have the recommendations, right?
Yes.
We apply these recommendations to the soil. That'd be gypsum, calcium lime, magnesium lime, what you have. Okay, so we still have to get that structure right.
That's exactly what these products are doing. The structure is related to the calcium-magnesium ratio.
But how long does this happen to get right?
It doesn't happen overnight. It can take up to 4 to 5 years. So we've engaged in soil improvement programs like what I'm talking about up the country. We've done one with another customer about 6 or 7 years ago, where we took on what we call pilot farms. It took about 5 years to correct them in really difficult areas in Cavan and Monaghan and Westmeath, really tough land. Like,
yeah.
The other area, Elisa, before we lose it, is we've talked about the physical aspect of soil. We talked about the chemical aspect of soil. The really important bit, and the bit that everybody forgets about, is the biological aspect of the soil. How do we increase the biological activity in our soils? And again, it's about getting that physical bit right, getting the soil opened up by aeration or by subsoiling. It's about getting that chemical bit right, but then it's about realizing that we have to get proper nutrients onto the soil in the form of slurry. And what we've found is that if you look at slurry, you analyze slurry, most of the nitrogen that's in slurry, and slurry is a very rich form of nitrogen, and especially pig slurry, but most of that nitrogen is in the form of ammonia. Ammonia is actually quite toxic to most living things. Ammonia is also bad for the air.
Yeah, it's one of your greenhouse gases. Yes, exactly. it's one of the big no-nos at the moment.
Exactly, because ammonia eventually leads to nitrous oxide. But if what we do then, we introduce a product, again, you're the agent for the product here in Dalton's, is a product called Digest It.
Yes.
And basically Digest It is an inoculant that you put into your slurry. And it's very like anyone that makes their own yogurt, to get a yogurt inoculant, put it into their milk, hold the milk at 37 degrees for 2 or 3 days, and they've this beautiful homemade yogurt. Well, I don't like to compare milk with slurry, but ultimately we have a similar inoculant.
It'll make yogurt out of slurry.
Exactly. And it goes from being a slurry, and you've often heard of slurry scorch, where farmers put slurry out on land, and the next thing 2 or 3 days later they see the grass kind of it got a brown hue to it. That's ultimately from the ammonia, the nitrogen coming on the form of ammonia.
In the cold weather as well, it actually makes it worse.
You often heard of massive worm kills. Yeah. And again, that can be related to ammonia, but also it can be related to the soil moisture, the deficits or soil moisture content of your soil.
Now, there is a good few slurry additives out there in the last 2 to 3 years.
Absolutely.
Digest It, like it's very well known, it's a high profile gig.
Yeah.
And so it's basically adding bacteria.
It's adding bacteria that utilise the ammonia in that slurry for their own growth.
Yes.
And by doing that, you're converting ammonia into what they call microbial nitrogen or organic nitrogen, which is the exact same nitrogen that we have in a well-rotted farmyard manure heap.
Yes.
You mentioned that there's 7 other products the last time I looked on the market. Before we decided on this particular product, we tested all 7 products. This is over the last 7 or 8 years. Digest It wins hands down in every one of them.
Really? We've
extensively tested this product in terms of grass growth, in terms of microbial activity in the soil, in terms of soil health. We've an 8-year trial, a trial that's ongoing for 8 years, carried out on a field in County Meath. We call it the Rossin Field trial. That has consistently given us 2 ton extra grass dry matter per hectare per year on treated slurry versus untreated slurry.
Very good.
If we take it that Teagasc values 1 ton of grass dry matter at €180 per ton, that gives us €360 extra of grass per hectare.
Yeah.
On ground that's treated with that has got treated slurry versus ground that has got untreated slurry.
But like, that's it for today.
Yeah.
I suppose to sum it up, like, thanks a million for talking to us. We're so happy about the relationship between Dalton's and Devenish. Coming into that time, the dry cow period, just everybody dreads the calving season. But I suppose if we know things are right and we've done good, careful management,
yes,
you know, we can actually come out easier at the other side.
Exactly.
And we have that support in Dalton's through Devenish now to keep going forward. And if you have any questions about the soil improvement program, about any of the products we talked about today, about a pre-calfer regime, anything at all, just give us a ring here in Dalton's. Thank you.